Good afternoon, namaste. Probably when you look at me, one of the obvious things is that I'm a little older than the gamers, than the gamer group, the online video games. But I want to talk. I did play one, and I don't know where I found it, and it was called Tubin, and it caught my attention because it was a guy, me, floating down a river on an inner tube, and the inner tube, the river just meandered, and I forget, there was some kind of obstacles or some, I forget the game part of it, but I just remember how much I enjoyed tubing, the idea of leisurely floating down the river. That's very appealing to me. I'm watching the scenery go by. Leisure is the key here. Windy, leisurely. Tubing on the inner tube. And the reason I'm talking about this today is because recently I talked about there's basically three things that I can remember that happened in my 2-day awakening experience. And I want to rehash three of them leading up to one that I want to talk about. Just recently, a couple of days ago, I talked about, or a few days ago, last week, who knows, time flies, about duality and non-duality, and how to learn that opposites are really, and if the truth be known, are the same, and how that led to a belly laugh that morphed into a belly tears, grief, mourning the death of the ego. And I set it up that way. It is essentially the last step, because after this process, this catharsis of laughing and crying, then I found myself naked, newborn on a dirty sidewalk in a gray, dirty, misty world, bereft of much light, darkness. But previous to that, the first thing I can remember is experiencing all my myriad of past lives, tens and tens and tens of thousands of past lives, and the way that I was to experience them was on that very inner tube, floating down that river. And the scenery would change, the time would change, the planet would change. The only thing that was common was me floating down, observing. And I had it was somehow removed from me. I recognized, but there was not one that stuck out. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The ordinariness of being a farmer, or being a hunter, or hunter-gatherer, or working in a mill, or just really mundane. I didn't see any kings, no trumpets, no angels, just average lives. And then near the winding road, I started to see where I had started to evolve somewhat. And the last lifetime I can remember is being probably Chinese in one of the Himalayas, or maybe Indian, maybe Nepalese, who knows, but definitely not a white guy, okay? Where I'd spent quite a bit of time, years and years and years. And I believe that this was the previous lifetime that I experienced, and then on this planet. And I was shown that my river couldn't take me where I needed to go. I got in in my light body and took off. And spent 400 or 500 years before this lifetime wandering the cosmos, experiencing existence in different planes, different planets, different universe, multiverse, different dimensions. Anyway, none of it really made sense, okay? But this wasn't about sense. This was like kind of a preview showing me. And then it set me up for something more intense. This was pretty much enjoyable. And then the latter part, the 400 or 500 years, encapsulated in probably moments of intensity and just colors and lights and beings and, pretty much above my pay grade, I didn't really... I just took away that I was being shown, and there was nothing else, just to experience, just to show me how I'd gotten from where I began, where I thought I began. But there's no beginning, no end after all. But for the purpose of, for editorial purposes, this is continuous, and I don't know how far back I went, and I went all the way up to this lifetime. But so this kind of set me up because it was kind of fun, and none of this boosted my ego. I was certainly nothing but an ordinary man who had an opportunity to do extraordinary things, as we all do. But the next thing was this, I found myself in the Library of Alexandria in ancient Egypt. At one point in time, I think my history is a little vague, but this library was destroyed at one point. It was a great loss of a lot of knowledge, the accumulation of knowledge and information from Egypt. At that time, Alexandria was kind of the center of the planet, center of civilization, or one of them, but very primary. And I remember going to this library that was lined with row after row after row after row of books. And what I experienced is I stood still as each row, and it was hundreds of it was taller than I could see. Each bookshelf was tremendously wide. It was almost like the width of the horizon, and then the height of as high as I could look. And these books, these shelves were moving, like on a conveyor belt. The shelves were moving closer and closer, and it would tip and empty. All that books would empty on me. And I was able to absorb every word in every language in every document, row by row by row by row. This continual crashing of books, and I was, as fast as they would crash on me, I would move on to the next one, absorb and absorb and absorb and absorb, and I came to this crescendo where not only did I realize that the books were a collection that was historically true, the books were also had yet to be written. at the time of Alexandria, and even at the time of my contemporary time. There were books that have remained unwritten. So there I was, and I absorbed and absorbed and I absorbed, and I got to a point where, for one brief terasecond, nanosecond, I knew everything. And of course, as soon as I realized that I knew everything, I realized I know nothing. I immediately forgot everything, and nothing remained. So I went from knowing everything to nothing, knowing nothing, in faster than a blink of an eye, faster than I can snap my finger. So I didn't have much time to relish this or even reflect on it. But what I took away from this is that the pressure for me to know, which had been my constant companion and compelling force in my life, I wanted to know more and more and more and more. And I was kind of fancying myself sort of a Renaissance man, because I didn't want to specialize in any one area. I was interested in all kinds of information, all kinds of knowledge, all kinds of basically seeking wisdom from wherever I could find it. But I was into accumulating knowledge, being exposed to information, sorting information, and gleaming the knowledge. So here I was, the epitome of my whole life. If I had anything to talk about, was a thirst in my life, was a thirst for more. There was never enough. Let me help you understand. Whenever I used to dive in the ocean or the pool and be completely submerged, I had this really strange feeling that I could never get wet enough. Even completely submerged in water wasn't wet enough. I thirsted for more. I wondered why. Part of me didn't seem wet. I wanted total immersion in the ocean. Yeah, funny thing, huh? Never felt I could get wet enough. I never felt I could know enough. And here in my awakening experience, I reached the pinnacle of knowing. And just as quickly as I was given everything, it was all taken away. I mean, everything. But what this did is it quenched my thirst. So just as I have never experienced getting wet enough, I can look forward to some experience somewhere where I can feel the immersion in the wetness that I crave. But I had gained everything, and then had it taken away from me, and felt blessed, unburdened, because I tell you, knowing everything can't last long. But what I took away from this, the growth I think was necessary, the reason I experienced this is that thirst for more and more and more, to know more, to know more, to more, was quenched, was satiated. And in this place came the greatest blessing at that point to date in my life, was the freedom from having to know, to accumulate, search, eliminate, to go from information to knowledge to wisdom, from information to knowledge to wisdom, yeah. And then how to store that and how to access that and all these mechanics. And it was all library. It was all happening in the library, you know. But I was relieved from this constant push to know more and more. And what took its place is the state I dwell in now. It's the comfort to tell you that I know what I need to know when I need to know it, almost immediately. And if I stumble, especially doing these live videos, well, they're live from my side. They're canned when you see them, but there's no rehearsal. This is it. There was no, I'm not reading from a text. This just was in my heart. And I put words around it. So, can you imagine? And when I'm sharing, sometimes I get stuck on something and I go, oh, well, and I let it go. And now, sometimes it will stay with me and I'll have to wait for a dream, or I'll just be daydreaming or meditating and boom, pop, there it is. But most times in the space of a couple of heartbeats, the word that I was looking for is there, because I do love words. I'm not a man of few words, I'm a man of many words. Working on being a man of less words. But what good would it be to share my teachings without words? Well, I do that anyway, but I mean, in this format, in this YouTube, I'm accumulating 333 half-hour video sharings. And then that's it. Okay? So I have 23 after today. And then I'm looking for something else. Probably more downtime, more meditation, more quiet time. Maybe it's time to withdraw for a while. Total isolation. And it doesn't have to be physical. I can pretty much be isolated right where I am. I've learned already that you don't have to go looking for things, that usually they're right in your backyard, opportunities. But it would be, a spiritual retreat might be pretty nice. And there's several in Taiwan that offer opportunities and beautiful places that I've been, that in the mountains, that I could go and spend time in constant meditation. Time will tell. My fractal. Yeah, what's on my path? So, that great urge to accumulate was put to rest, to accumulate knowledge, wisdom, towards the goal of awakening. But I was relieved of all that searching. Funny that I continued accumulating knowledge long after my days of question. I'd become a man of no questions before I became a man of no longer motivated by accumulation of wisdom or searching for wisdom. So there we go. The journey through the past lives. This incredible experience of knowing everything for a nanosecond. Quickly switched to knowing nothing. Literally, blah, blah, blah. I was kind of a blithering idiot. I wasn't even sure who I was. And that's understandable, because anytime, if I ask you who you are, I think you'd be hard pressed to tell me. I used to ask my students that sometimes. Who are you? I'm a student. I'm a girl. No, that's not. That's what you are. That's not who you are. So that's a hard question for anyone to deal with. Who you are. And the best answer for that is, don't know. As that beautiful Zen monk once said, don't know. Notice the absence of pronoun. No, I don't know. Don't know. So today, this is a long-winded talk about knowing the unknowable. And I briefly knew the unknowable by knowing everything, knowable or unknowable, for a brief, my shining moment where I knew the unknowable. And then I didn't know anything. Quite a fall, but quite a relief. I can tell you, to be relieved of the burden of searching, of putting effort into accumulating more spiritual knowledge, more spiritual wisdom, all of that. Just relieved. And that sort of set me up for the last step for me, was to recognize the Buddha laughed, to recognize the absurdity that we think we live in a dual world, me and you. To think that we're separated and divided, and that there's somehow we have this existence that's defined by the ego, that's supported by the ego, and the mind with the small m. But I've taught many times that it's really critical, because jhana yoga, the yoga of the four yogic paths, the one I appealed to me and I pursued, was that yoga of wisdom. Through the intellect, through the intellectual process. Because I learned early on, or I considered early on, I tried to silence my mind, stop my mind, never successfully. And then I started getting a little confounded, because mindful means to live in the moment. But it's not mind emptiness. So somehow the mind is not the enemy. You have to learn how to ignore, or at least be entertained by the little m, the monkey mind. Listen to its noise, and it becomes, like they said, the hum of, I can point to the elevator. How do I point to the air conditioner up there on the wall, which is not on because it makes too much noise and interferes with this my sound system. But to shut, somebody just said, ignore the hum of the air conditioning. So it's really been funny, and I always thought, like, okay, no, why are we all idiots? I mean, really, why are we given this mind, this fine tool? In fact, why are we given this mind that seems to be the only tool that we have? Ultimately, this jhana yoga, the yoga of knowledge, the yoga of wisdom. You need the mind, the big M. Why would I discard that? Why would I try to shut that down when it was indeed the driving factor that led to my awakening? It's my path. And I think the path chooses you. You know, you have to have propensities towards, some people compassion, that's bhakti yoga. Some people through their selfless actions, that's karma yoga. Some people through their understanding of energy, chi, mana, how to use energy constructively and usefully, and use this to enhance the process for you, refine the process of enlightenment. Raja Yoga, the path of royalty, are I'm trying to think of Sadhguru's Kriya Yoga. And Paramahamsa, my first teacher, who was already passed when I just told you about autobiography of a yogi. He taught Kriya Yoga too, which is the same as the energy. It's the same as other people call it the Raja Yoga. Raja was the king, the kingly path. So where do you gravitate to? You can, just by simply worshiping, chanting, by compassion, by actions, by study of energy, or the study of wisdom, accumulating wisdom. And you can mix and match too if you want. So anyway, I thought that, there again, why be given this mind only to shut it down? That came from my misunderstanding. I wanted clarity. And it turned out the clarity had nothing to do with sight, vision. Clarity had everything to do with knowing my purpose. And funny thing was, I knew my purpose from my first breath in this planet. To reunite, to find home, to get there the fastest way possible. Took me 64 years, so I wasn't really quick on the draw, 64 years in this lifetime, plus tens and tens and tens and hundreds, probably hundreds of thousands of lifetimes leading up to this lifetime. So, coming from this so-called high point of knowing everything to knowing nothing, and then getting the reassurance that not only did I not have to frantically or work so hard to accumulate it, because that meant finding, sorting, filing, and then storage, and then access, right? You know how it is when you have too many things. Where the hell is that thing? Well, too much information. How do you find it again? So I perfected. I had a system. And it was actually, I visualized a little guy going and finding the file that I needed. He had to go get my stash that I needed at that moment. And I got pretty good at that process. Until this awakening experience where I was humbled. So then I had to go back with the rest of us that knowing contrary to my experience, no matter how much we know, there's more to know. And I mean that in the most clear, beautiful, conscious, vibrant, divine way. There's always the unknowable. It remains unknowable until we know it. And just like me, I knew that there was no more unknowable because I knew it all for a nanosecond. Only to have it ripped away from me and then be the abject opposite of knowing everything to knowing nothing. I mean, zero. I truly felt like an empty vehicle. No, the body was there, but nobody was home. And this was only to teach me the valuable lesson. And now I rest comfortable in knowing that most things are unknowable. I know that. I know that most things are unknowable. And again, all this process has brought me relief. My journey through my lifetimes was kind of yawning. I was comfortable, relaxed. I was probably sipping some kind of beverage, iced coffee, when I was cruising down meandering down the river, looking at, with no investment into, oh, that's me, recognition, sure, but just, if there's one thing I took away from it, is that how ordinary of lifetimes, what an ordinary man I am. Having lived through many ordinary, with an exceptional, extraordinary that included being somewhere else. But my experience on this earth, my lifetimes on this earth, has been pretty much as an ordinary man or woman. Because I believe we have to try both, right? To find the balance. But in my journey down the stream, I didn't discriminate. So that was kind of a comforting, kind of a relaxing, and then I had this huge crescendo of books crashing on me and accumulating this, leading up, culminating in the understanding that, however briefly, I knew everything, only to have it all stripped away. But that feeling of emptiness was replaced by a deep breath of contentment, learning that what I learned today, I need to know it when I need to know it. If I don't know it, I don't need to know it. How reassuring. And that set me up for the longer experience of the resolving the puzzle of apparent duality. And understanding that, indeed, that it was unification process. The theory of everything that Stephen Hawking looked for, that fascinates me. I'd love to know the theory of everything. The theory of everything that accounted for everything. So, this catharsis of getting rid of the stored emotions, the laughter and the laughing at myself, and then mourning the death of the ego, and then only to be rudely thrown into a world that was totally unprepared, totally alone. And there I stayed.